The battlefield fell silent. A giant lay dead at the feet of a boy with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones. How? That question has echoed through generations. How did a shepherd boy face what trained warriors couldn't? What was David's secret? In our world of instant solutions and quick fixes, we've forgotten what David knew deep in his bones. Some battles aren't won with bigger weapons, but with unshakable confidence in who stands with you. I've spent years studying the ancient texts, exploring what transformed an overlooked shepherd into history's most celebrated king. The answer isn't found in David's strength, but in his surrender. Not in his strategies, but in his secret sanctuary. Today, we're diving into the words David wrote after surviving years of being hunted, betrayed, and pushed to his breaking point. 2 Samuel 22 isn't just ancient poetry. It's a survival guide for modern chaos. Let me paint you a picture, far from the sanitized Sunday school version of David's life. This wasn't the golden boy with a crown. This was a man sleeping in caves, eating whatever he could find, constantly looking over his shoulder. The king who once loved him now wanted his head. His name was on wanted posters across Israel. Night after night, David fell asleep, not knowing if he'd wake to the sound of soldiers. Day after day, he moved from hideout to hideout, away from family, away from comfort, away from everything familiar. And yet, in his darkest moments, David discovered something life-changing. Something that transformed his exile from a tragedy into a masterclass in spiritual resilience. While running from King Saul, David wasn't just surviving. He was learning to thrive in impossible circumstances. He was discovering that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly sustains you. Imagine this. It's midnight in a cold, damp cave. David sits with his back against stone walls, a small fire casting long shadows. Outside, the wilderness stretches endlessly. Somewhere out there, Saul's soldiers are searching. In this moment, with nothing but uncertainty ahead, David doesn't crumble. Instead, he looks around at the very walls that shelter him and has a revelation that will change everything. The Lord is my rock. Not a metaphor, not poetry, reality, as tangible as the stone against his back. This wasn't a theological concept to David. It was survival, the ground beneath him when everything else gave way, the unmovable reality when circumstances constantly shifted. And this is where our modern disconnect begins. We've reduced these powerful declarations to refrigerator magnets and inspirational wall art, forgetting they were forged in fire, not in comfort. When David called God his rock, he meant, when everyone else abandoned me, God remained. When my plans collapsed, God didn't move. When my strength failed, his never did. In today's language, when the diagnosis comes, when the relationship ends, when the depression won't lift, when anxiety paralyzes, you need more than positive thinking. You need solid ground. You need a rock. But David didn't stop there. The Lord is my fortress. Picture ancient warfare. No air support, no distant missiles. Combat was intimate, brutal, face to face. In that world, a fortress wasn't luxury. It was the difference between life and death. For David, this wasn't about building walls to hide behind. It was about finding safety when everything around him threatened destruction. In the wilderness, fortresses weren't constructed, they were discovered. Natural formations offering protection, high ground, defensible positions, places to breathe when breathing seemed impossible. David found these physical refuges throughout his years on the run, but he discovered something greater. The ultimate fortress wasn't made of stone, it was made of presence. Here's what changes everything. God doesn't just offer protection, he becomes it. Today, we're surrounded by different dangers. Information overload, constant comparison, financial pressure, relationship breakdowns. The noise never stops, the demands never cease. And in this chaos, the invitation remains. Come inside the fortress. Not to escape responsibility, but to find strength to face it. Not to hide from reality, but to engage it from a place of security. What would change if you started each day inside the fortress instead of instantly engaging with every threat, real or perceived? What if peace wasn't just a feeling to chase, but a position to occupy? The Lord is my deliverer. These words hit different when deliverance isn't theoretical. David wasn't writing from speculation, but from experience. He had seen enemies close in, options disappear, death approach, and then inexplicably rescue arrive. When Saul threw spears at him in the palace, when he was surrounded in battle, when his own men talked about stoning him after Ziklag. Each time deliverance came. Not always in the way David expected, not always immediately, but always perfectly timed. Here's what we miss. God's deliverance isn't just about removing you from danger. Sometimes it's about revealing his presence within it. We want God to change our circumstances. He often wants to change us through our circumstances. We pray for escape routes. Sometimes God says, "Watch me walk with you through what you thought would destroy you." In our instant gratification culture, we've lost the patient trust that waits for deliverance while standing in the fire. We want immediate relief, one-click solutions, but some battles aren't won in moments. They're won in endurance. And here's the paradox. Sometimes our greatest testimony isn't that God took us out of the valley, but that he walked with us through it. My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge. Notice the personal language. David doesn't say the rock or a refuge. He says, my rock, and I take refuge. This isn't inherited faith. This isn't secondhand spirituality. This is intimate, tested, proven relationship. David discovered what many of us miss. There's a profound difference between knowing about God and hiding in God. One is information, the other is transformation. One fills your head, the other saves your life. In Hebrew thought, to take refuge meant to physically run to a safe place, not just mentally acknowledge it exists. It was action, not theory. Today, we've intellectualized faith. We debate doctrines while our souls starve for shelter. We've mastered theological arguments while losing the art of spiritual refuge. What would it look like to practically take refuge in God? Not just pray about your anxiety, but bring it completely into God's presence? Not just ask for help with addiction, but place yourself fully under divine protection? Refuge isn't passive, it's active surrender. When everything in you wants to fight, fix, or flee, refuge says, before I do anything else, I bring myself fully into the presence of God. My shield. On ancient battlefields, a shield wasn't ceremonial, it was essential. The difference between coming home or being carried home. But here's what many miss. A shield only works when you raise it. It must be positioned between you and the danger. It must be lifted at the right moment. It must be trusted enough to stand behind. When David called God his shield, he was acknowledging, I cannot absorb every attack. I need protection greater than my own strength. In our self-sufficient culture, this feels like weakness. We're told to be our own protection, to develop thicker skin, to not let things affect us. But what if real strength isn't found in becoming impenetrable, but in knowing what truly protects you? The arrows look different now. They come as rejection, failure, shame, comparison, past trauma. They strike with precision, targeting our deepest vulnerabilities. And against these weapons, our own defenses eventually fail. We need something, someone stronger. To declare God is my shield means I don't just endure the attacks, I have active protection against them. The shield of truth against lies, the shield of identity against shame, the shield of purpose against meaninglessness, the shield of forgiveness against guilt, the shield of hope against despair. But remember, a shield must be raised, must be positioned, must be trusted, the horn of my salvation. This language feels strange to modern ears, but in ancient Near Eastern culture, horns represented power, specifically offensive power. David is shifting from defensive language to offensive declaration. God isn't just protecting, he's advancing, not just shielding, conquering. In Hebrew imagery, the horn was associated with strength that pushes forward, that overcomes obstacles, that claims victory. This changes everything about how we face challenges. We're not just surviving the onslaught, we're part of a divine advance that cannot be stopped. Depression isn't just held at bay, it's pushed back. Addiction isn't just managed, it's overcome. Fear isn't just controlled, it's conquered. This is salvation, not as mere rescue, but as complete reversal. Not just removing from danger, but restoring to purpose. In today's spiritual landscape, we've grown comfortable with a defensive posture, holding the line, not losing more ground, surviving one more day. But David reminds us, with God, the momentum eventually shifts, the horn rises, the advance begins. The question becomes, are you ready to move from defense to offense? From surviving to overcoming? From maintaining to advancing? My stronghold. There's deep emotion in these words. They're spoken not from casual observation, but desperate dependence. A stronghold was the final fallback position. When all other defenses failed, when armies were scattered, when options disappeared, the stronghold remained. David had experienced this reality repeatedly. Moments when his cleverness couldn't save him, when his fighting skills weren't enough, when his supporters abandoned him. In those moments, only one reality remained secure: God himself as the ultimate stronghold. Here's the transformative truth. Sometimes losing every other security is the only way to discover the one security that cannot be taken. Many of us haven't found God as stronghold because we haven't exhausted our other strongholds. We still believe, if my finances are strong enough, if my relationships are secure enough, if my reputation is established enough, if my health holds out long enough. But what happens when these fail? When the account empties? When the relationship ends? When the diagnosis comes? When strength fails? That's when we discover what David knew. There is a stronghold that doesn't depend on circumstances, that isn't weakened by attack, that stands when everything else falls. My refuge and my savior, you save me from violence. This declaration comes from someone intimately acquainted with violence, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, and psychological. David had experienced the violence of betrayal from Saul, his mentor turned hunter, the violence of slander as his name was dragged through Israel, the violence of rejection from those he served, the violence of his own failures and falls. And through it all, he discovered God doesn't just comfort after violence, he saves from it. Not always by removing it, but by preserving what matters most through it. In today's world, violence takes many forms. The violence of shame that says you're defined by your worst moments. The violence of anxiety that steals present joy with future fears. The violence of addiction that promises relief while delivering bondage. The violence of trauma that keeps you locked in past pain. Against these modern weapons, David's ancient testimony stands. You save me from violence. Not just physical safety, but soul preservation. Not just outward protection, but inward peace. Here's where everything changes. David didn't just experience God's protection, he declared it. Didn't just feel it, he spoke it. Didn't just remember it, he proclaimed it. This pattern appears throughout David's life. Before Goliath fell, David declared, "The battle is the Lord's." In the caves, he wrote psalms of confidence before deliverance came. On the run, he composed songs of victory while still being hunted. David understood, declaration often precedes manifestation. This isn't positive thinking or name-it-claim-it theology. This is aligning your words with what God has already established as true. It's saying what God says about your situation before your situation changes to match what God says. And this practice transforms how we face our modern giants. When anxiety roars, you declare, "The Lord is my rock." Not because you feel grounded yet, but because his stability isn't dependent on your feelings. When shame whispers, you declare, "The Lord is my shield." Not because you feel protected, but because his defense doesn't depend on your perfection. When the future looks dark, you declare, "The horn of my salvation." Not because you see victory, but because God's advance isn't limited by your vision. This isn't denial. This is standing in a reality bigger than your current experience. So what does this mean for you, right now, in the middle of whatever you're facing? It means you have access to the same God who is rock, fortress, deliverer, refuge, shield, horn of salvation, and stronghold for David. It means your circumstances, no matter how dire, don't have the final word. It means you can start declaring these truths over your situation, not as magic formulas, but as reminders of who stands with you. When the diagnosis comes, you are my rock. When the bills pile up, you are my fortress. When addiction calls again, you are my deliverer. When panic attacks hit, you are my refuge. When shame spirals down, you are my shield. When depression doesn't lift, you are the horn of my salvation. When all else fails, you are my stronghold. Not because saying these words changes everything instantly, but because they align you with what's eternally true beyond your temporary experience. At its core, David's song in 2 Samuel 22 isn't just testimony, it's invitation. An invitation to discover what he discovered, that God is most clearly revealed not in comfort but in crisis, that divine strength is most perfectly displayed in human weakness, that sometimes the cave becomes the classroom for your most important spiritual lessons. Whatever you're facing today, whether it's a relationship crumbling, a health crisis looming, a financial pressure mounting, an emotional darkness deepening, a spiritual dryness lingering, there is an ancient path marked by a shepherd boy who became a king. A path that leads not around difficulty, but through it. Not avoiding pain, but finding purpose in it. And along that path, you'll discover what David discovered. Not just that God helps you survive the storm, but that sometimes the storm itself is where God reveals himself most powerfully. Not just that God is a rock, but that he is your rock. Not just that God protects, but that he protects you. Not just that God delivers, but that he delivers you. This isn't distant theology. This is intimate reality. This is the shepherd's secret. This is the warrior's strength. This is the king's confidence, and it's available to you right now, exactly where you are. The Lord is your rock.